Russ Maloney!
I like to know things. I like to know the answer to things. And I like to find the answer. In fact, in my group of friends, it can be kind of annoying being friends with me sometimes because they sometimes have the feeling that I have to be a know-it-all. I kind of come across that way. But really, it's not that I have to be right. It's the fact that there's a truth, that there's an answer, and I like to know what it is. So I'm wrong just as often as I'm right. But it's that finding that answer. I'm kind of a slave to accuracy. It's very important to me to know what the answer is to things. Now, in my family growing up, it was hard to know the answer because I'm the youngest of 6 children. That alone doesn't make it hard to know the answer, but it's the fact that the youngest of 6 with an 18-year spread in all of the siblings and 2 sets of twins. So it went twins, single, twins, Russ. And 8 years between me and the closest siblings, and then that 18-year spread. So I was at the end of a very long game of telephone, where by the time I got the answer, well, if I got it at all, it was very garbled. The information just didn't get through. So I didn't know, being kind of spread out from my siblings, I didn't know them as well as you might. I wasn't particularly close to them. Obviously, I grew up with them, but I especially didn't know my eldest brother, Ron, the oldest set of twins, because when I was very small, he moved to Atlanta. And so Atlanta is, I grew up in Indianapolis. Indianapolis is not a small town. Compared to Atlanta, though, it is. Atlanta is a cosmopolitan city, Indianapolis not so much. So my brother Ron moved to Atlanta, and it was this far-off place, and I only saw him every couple of years at Christmas or whatnot. So when he'd come to visit, I remember one time when I was in elementary school asking him, well, how many days did it take you to get here? Like, hours. I'm like, no, come on, how many days? Hours. So it never really got it through my head. So right after I graduated from high school, he came to visit my parents and me, and this was pretty cool because I didn't really know him very well. So he came to visit, and I knew that even though I didn't know him very well, I knew that he'd come to do some legal stuff, but I never asked what it was because, frankly, it would take too long to get the answer. I probably wasn't interested anyway, and the other thing I knew is that he'd quit his job, so he could, be able to spend a few months there. That was fine. I also knew that he'd been sick. Now, I only knew this because when I was in middle school, a few years before that, my parents had taken me out of school, or not taken me out of school, taken me and sent me over to a friend's house for a week. This was during the school year, so I knew this was kind of weird because you don't sleep over on school nights. And so that they could go to Atlanta to be with Ron while he was going through some tests. But I never really found out what the tests were. And again, I was 12, I didn't ask. So I knew that, and it was kind of referred to. I knew he was sick. I also knew when he came to visit that he was gay. But I didn't know it, catch a theme here, I didn't know it because anyone ever actually directly told me. I knew it because my sister had gone to visit a year or two before, and she then, when she came visit Ron down in Atlanta, and when she came back, she was not happy, and she told my mom about how she was unhappy. Now, I never really heard the conversation. I heard my mom's side of the conversation, and then I asked my mom, why is Rita so upset? Well, she didn't like going down and being part of that lifestyle. Well, what lifestyle? Well, Ron's lifestyle. Well, what do you mean? Well, going out and being part of that lifestyle. I don't know what you're talking about. So finally, my mom just blurts out, Ron's gay, Russ. Like, I should have known that all along. And I'm like, okay. Now, in Indiana, especially in the 80s, didn't have a lot of experience with gay people. I mean, sure, people I went to high school with were gay, but they didn't come out and say it. And so it was not something you dealt with every day. So I knew all of these things, and I knew when Ron came to visit right after I graduated from high school, I didn't know him very well, but I liked him. He was just a likable guy, and I liked him because he treated me like a regular person as opposed to the annoying little brother. Even though I was the annoying little brother, he treated me like a regular person. He also let me drive his car, which was brand new. And when you're 18 years old getting to drive a brand new sports car, that's fun. But he treated me like a real guy. So one day, parents are gone. We're alone in the house together, and he sits me down. And I think he just took advantage of the time. I don't know if he had planned to do this. And he told me that he had AIDS. Now, I knew what AIDS was because everyone in the 80s knew what AIDS was if you watched any TV or anything. Rock Hudson had died from it a few years before. In Indiana, we also had a local celebrity named Ryan White, you may have heard of, who had gotten AIDS through a blood transfusion and wasn't allowed back into school, and that became a national story. So we were familiar with it, but again, just like I didn't know any gay people, didn't have a lot of experience with this. But I just knew it was scary. That's what I knew. But Ron wasn't scared. He was very positive about it. He was like, Russ, I'm on, they just gave me some new meds. I feel better than I felt in a long time. I'm fine. Except he wasn't fine. A few years later, 3 years later to be exact, my mom mentions to me that Ron is now in hospice. Now, I'm embarrassed to say this now, I really am, that I didn't know what hospice was and I didn't ask. I didn't know what it meant. So I was like, okay. But so it came more of a shock to me than maybe the rest of my family that a few weeks later when Ron died, on May 22nd, 1990. Now, when he died, he was still in Atlanta, and I had a bit of a problem because at the time I was taking care of somebody's house. I was taking care of a friend's house and their pets, 2 dogs and 4 cats. And so I didn't know anybody else who knew these people. So I didn't have any mutual friends I could go to and explain my problem. Hey, I need to leave town. Can you look after people's house? So that was my problem. I also knew I wanted to go to Atlanta as part of my brother's funeral. This is also, remember, before cell phones. Hard to imagine a time before cell phones, but this is before cell phones. I couldn't just pick up a phone and call them when they were 400 miles away and tell them what was going on. So I felt really weird about it because I didn't want just to have somebody else take care of their house, which to them would be a stranger taking care of it. So I didn't know the answer. So I went to my parents. I went to my father specifically, and I asked my dad, what do I do? Do I stay and miss Ron's funeral, take care of the house and the pets, or do I go to Atlanta and find somebody else? I now know that was probably, well, not probably, I now know that that was not the time to ask my dad that question. He had just lost his son, his eldest son, by a few minutes, but he had just lost his son, so he was in no condition to help me problem solve. But I didn't know that then. I just knew I had a question I needed the answer to, this problem. So I asked my dad, and he said, don't worry about it, stay. So I stayed. So, while more than 1,000 people gathered at Atlanta's largest cathedral to pay respects to my brother and to sing Ave Maria, I was sitting in someone else's living room in Indianapolis. When my parents and my siblings were kind of trying to cope with their grief amongst these 1,000 people that they didn't know at the funeral, I was walking 2 dogs named Sam and Alex. When my family was at the ceremony after Ron was cremated, and they watched them give his ashes to his partner, Ron's ashes to his partner, I was scooping cat litter. I know it was like if Ron could see me, I think he'd understand. I think he'd even get a laugh out of it. But you know, what I learned then is that there's a right answer for things, and what I chose to do was wrong. So after the funeral, several weeks later, I learned that what Ron was really doing when he was in town, right after I graduated from high school a few years before, was he was making sure that my college was paid for, that he was setting that up. And thanks to Ron, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. Now, I know a lot of things, and when someone has a question, I am a slave to accuracy. because I know what happens when you ask someone for the answer, and for all the best reasons, the answer you get is wrong.